This is Matthew with Samsara Media. I'm continuing my critical bureaucratic studies research project with a reading of the first chapter of Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media. This chapter is called The Medium is the Message, which is a pretty famous dictum that McLuhan pioneered, and it captures a lot of his thought. It is a counterintuitive insight that I think once you accept it, it really radically changes how you see technology, how you see the world, and how you see yourself. So let's dig into it. I'm just going to read it, probably stop and comment along the way. But basically, I'm using you, my wonderful viewer, to read more and to read more closely. So thank you. You make my life better simply by existing. Let's dive in. The medium is the message. In a culture like ours, long accustomed to splitting and dividing all things as a means of control, it is sometimes a bit of a shock to be reminded that in operational and practical fact, the medium is the message. This is merely to say that the personal and social consequences of any medium, that is, of any extension of ourselves, result from the new scale that is introduced into our affairs by each extension of ourselves or by any new technology. All right, I'm going to stop right there. So we can already see in this very first paragraph just the connection to Foucault's biopolitics, as we talked about in the last video where I read his right of death and power over life paradigm. Long accustomed to splitting and dividing all things as a means of control, the drive for control in modern society is driven by this new exercise of power, which Foucault describes as the power over life, which wants to capture and analyze and understand the forces of life so that they can be managed and cultivated at the level of humanity as a biological population. So McLuhan, he's not referencing that here specifically, but he sees that. He understands that technology, a medium of information, is a mode of control. And what he's trying to argue is that the medium itself is the message. So as he clarifies, it's actually just the new scale of activity that the medium makes possible, which is the real effect of the medium, not any of the particular content of that medium. This is counterintuitive because we think, oh, I can counteract the effects of a medium with maybe more wholesome content or content that disrupts the medium's function, but the reality is that simply using the medium is to submit to a new level of scale and the possibilities inherent within that medium, just by the nature of its construction. Important to note is that he says the extension of ourselves or by any new technology, those are equivalent for him. A technology for McLuhan is just a way of extending the human into their environment. So if I use a hammer, the hammer becomes an extension of myself, a way that I can extend myself in new ways into my world and act on it. A medium is just a new way of being able to insert myself into the world to create outcomes, to actualize my will. That is what, and so technology is in some sense a prosthesis that is attached to us and it becomes a part of us. It's never just a wholly separate object because there's a sense in which our use of the technology is a way of extending ourselves. So let's continue. Thus, with automation, for example, the new patterns of human association tend to eliminate jobs. It is true. That is the negative result. Positively, automation creates roles for people, which is to say depth of involvement in their work and human association that our preceding mechanical technology had destroyed. Many people would be disposed to say that it was not the machine, but what one did with the machine that was its meaning or message. In terms of the ways in which the machine altered our relations to one another and to ourselves, it mattered not in the least whether it turned out cornflakes or Cadillacs. The restructuring of human work and association was shaped by the technique of fragmentation, That is the essence of machine technology. The essence of automation technology is the opposite. It is integral and decentralist in depth, just as the machine was fragmentary, centralist, and superficial in its patterning of human relationships. So now he's introducing another dimension here. He's trying to shift between machine to automaton, to automation. So he's comparing older models of technology, this machinic model, to something that was uh, inherently what it did was it fragmented things, it centralized things, and it only superficially mirrored the pattern of human relations. But you can see that he's already so early. McLuhan's writing this 50 years ago. He's already talking about automation, and he's saying that this automation is different from the older machinic technologies. He's saying that it is integral and decentralized. I think this is why people connect AI and blockchain together. Blockchain being decentralized, artificial intelligence being this integral movement of trying to have information um, connect up with itself, be able to think about itself, to be able to create new things, to be able to recombine and to develop the connections that are internal to the information itself. Let's keep this in mind. He sees the older model of fragmentation and centralization, which are two interesting things, that those two things coexist. We should investigate that more. But this older model of fragmentation and centralization is giving way to this newer model of automation, or the automaton, which is integral and decentralized. So he's going to go on and talk about electric light to try to prove his point about why the medium itself just is the message. So the instance of the electric light may prove illuminating in this connection. The electric light is pure information. It is a medium without a message, as it were, unless it is used to spell out some verbal add or name. This fact, characteristic of all media, means that the content of any medium is always another medium. That's interesting. The content of any medium is always another medium. So the content of writing is speech, just as the written word is the content of print, and print is the content of the telegraph. If it is asked, what is the content of speech, it is necessary to say, it is an actual process of thought, which is in itself nonverbal. I think there's a few philosophers that would dispute that. I might find myself among them, but let's keep moving. An abstract painting represents direct manifestation of creative thought processes as they might appear in computer designs. What we're considering here, however, are the psychic and social consequences of the designs or patterns as they amplify or accelerate existing processes. So did you see that he's talking about how a medium just is without a message? It just is pure information, which means that every medium has as its content a different medium. So you have, it's almost like information running through other information. Two different modes of information are commingling with each other. And what he's arguing is that the primary medium is either accelerating or decelerating the movement of the information, which is its, or the medium which is its content. It's the social and psychic implications of how does this medium accelerate, decelerate, change, fragment, or centralize the other medium for which it serves as a conduit. Like how print has as its content the written word. But when that medium becomes the content of another medium, the written word, which was formerly sort of its own medium, is now transformed by its acceleration and dispensation through a new medium. The message of any medium or technology is the change of scale or pace or pattern that it introduces into human affairs. This here's a money quote. The medium is the message. McLuhan saying that a medium or technology message, what it transmits, just is the change of scale, pace, or pattern that it introduces into human affairs. So it's literally the properties of the medium, the way that they concretely transform human possibilities. That's the message, regardless of any particular content, whether it's cat memes, recipes, or government documents. The railway did not introduce movement or transportation or wheel or road into human society, but it accelerated and enlarged the scale of previous human functions, creating totally new kinds of cities and new kinds of work and leisure. This happened whether the railway functioned in a tropical or a northern environment and is quite independent of the freight or content of the railway medium. The airplane, on the other hand, by accelerating the rate of transportation, tends to dissolve the railway form of city politics and association quite independently of what the airplane is used for. Let us return to the electric light. Whether the light is being used for brain surgery or night baseball is a matter of indifference. It could be argued that these activities are in some way the content of the electric light, since they could not exist without the electric light. This fact merely underlines the point that the medium is the message, because it is the medium that shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action. The content or uses of such media are as diverse as they are ineffectual in shaping the form of human association. Indeed, it is only too typical that the content of any medium blinds us to the character of the medium. It is only today that industries have become aware of the various kinds of business in which they are engaged. When IBM discovered that it was not in the business of making office equipment or business machines, but that it was in the business of processing information, then it began to navigate with clear vision. The General Electric Company makes a considerable portion of its profits from electric light bulbs and lighting systems. It has not yet discovered that, quite as much as AT&T, it is in the business of moving information. So there's a few other claims in this passage that are important to realize. Talking about the electric light, all of the activities which are now possible, this could include activities, experiences, social outcomes that are now possible because of the existence of a particular medium. We could describe them as their content. But then he goes a step further and he says that not only is the content ineffectual at actually reshaping or fundamentally changing the medium, because the medium is its own message, and the content is fundamentally indifferent, but actually he goes even further and says that the content can blind us to the character of the medium. There's a sense in which when a technology hits, it takes a while to actually figure out what's going on here. What's actually happening? As he points out, it took a while for IBM to realize that they're not just building business machines or copiers. They're actually in the business of processing information. But it takes time to realize the effects of the technology, which means the technology is working well before we know what it's doing. And that to some extent it even obscures its own operation because we see the content and we think that the content is the message of the medium. We think that the content of the medium of electric light is staying up late. We think, oh, I'm staying up late. But actually, the medium has caused that to be possible, has created that activity. And that's what makes staying up late downstream. It's an ancillary effect of the medium's existence and operation. There's a lot here, but I'm going to go on. The electric light escapes attention as a communication medium just because it has no content. This makes it an invaluable instance of how people fail to study media at all. For it is not till the electric light is used to spell out some brand name that is noticed as a medium. Then it is not the light, but the content that is noticed. The message of the electric light is like the message of electric power in industry, totally radical, pervasive, and decentralized. For electric light and power are separate from their uses, yet they eliminate time and space, factors in human association, exactly as do radio, telegraph, telephone, and TV, creating involvement in depth. A fairly complete handbook for studying the extensions of man could be made up from selections from Shakespeare. Some might quibble about whether or not he was referring to TV in these familiar lines from Romeo and Juliet. But soft! What light through yonder window breaks? It speaks, and yet says nothing. In Othello, which as much as King Lear is concerned with the torment of people transformed by illusions, there are these lines that bespeak Shakespeare's intuition of the transforming powers of new media. Is there not charms by which the property of youth and maidhood may be abused? Have you not read Roderigo of such thing? In Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, which is almost completely devoted to both a psychic and social study of communication, Shakespeare states his awareness that true social and political navigation depend upon anticipating the consequences of innovation. The providence that's in a watchful state knows almost every grain of Plutus gold, finds bottom in the uncomprehensive deeps, keeps place with thought, and almost like the gods, does thoughts unveil in their dumb cradles. The increasing awareness of the action of media, quite independently of their content or programming, was indicated in the annoyed and anonymous stanza. In modern thought, if not in fact, nothing is that doesn't act, so that is reckoned wisdom, which describes the scratch, but not the itch. The same kind of total configurational awareness that reveals why the medium is socially the message has occurred in the most recent and radical medical theories. In his Stress of Life, Hans Selle tells of the dismay of a recent colleague on hearing of Selle's theory. When he saw me thus launched on yet another enraptured description of what I observed in animals treated with this or that impure toxic material, he looked at me with desperately sad eyes and said in obvious despair, "But Selle, try to realize what you're doing before it's too late. You have now decided to spend your entire life studying the pharmacology of dirt." As Selle deals with the total environmental situation in his stress theory of disease, so the latest approach to media study considers not only the content, but the medium and the cultural matrix within which the particular medium operates. The older unawareness of the psychic and social effects of media can be illustrated from almost any of the conventional pronouncements. In accepting an honorary degree from the University of Notre Dame a few years ago, General David Sarnoff made this statement: "We are too prone to make technological instruments the scapegoats for the sins of those who wield them. The products of modern science are not in themselves good or bad. It is the way they are used that determines their value." That is the voice of the current somnambulism. Suppose we were to say, apple pie is in itself neither good nor bad. It is the way it is used that determines its value. Or, the smallpox virus is in itself neither good nor bad. It is the way it is used that determines its value. Again, firearms are in themselves neither good nor bad. It is the way they are used that determines their value. That is, if the slugs reach the right people, firearms are good. If the TV tube fires the right ammunition at the right people, it is good. I am not being perverse. There is simply nothing in the Sarnoff statement that will bear scrutiny, for it ignores the nature of the medium, of any and all media, in the true Narcissus style of one hypnotized by the amputation and extension of his own being in a new technical form. That note right there, the point about Narcissus, one thing McLuhan focuses on later in Understanding Media is how, because technology is an extension of ourselves, we can get fixated on it and totally miss what it's actually doing. In some way, it has parallels to how we misunderstand ourselves when we get too fixated on ourselves. General Sarnoff went on to explain his attitude to the technology of print, saying that it was true that print caused much trash to circulate, but it had also disseminated the Bible and the thoughts of seers and philosophers. It has never occurred to General Sarnoff that any technology could do anything but add itself on to what we already are. There's a good line. In this, McLuhan implies that the addition of a new technology to human society and relations is not just additive. It's not just a plus one, it's not accretive, but the addition of a new technology transforms all of the existing technologies too, not simply by creating new possibilities, but also by creating a new medium through which we could run the old media too. So words are transformed by the fact that they can now be transmitted over the internet. Or speech is transformed by the fact that it can now be communicated through video. We can never go back to the world where speech is just speech. We now live in the world where speech can be video or audio or a recording that can be transmitted. Such economists as Robert Theobald, W. Rostow, and John Kenneth Galbraith have been explaining for years how it is that classical economics cannot explain change or growth. And the paradox of mechanization is that although it is itself the cause of maximal growth and change, the principle of mechanization excludes the very possibility of growth or the understanding of change. For mechanization is achieved by fragmentation of any process and by putting the fragmented parts in a series. Yet as David Hume showed in the 18th century, there is no principle of causality in a mere sequence. That one thing follows another accounts for nothing. Nothing follows from following except change. So the greatest of all reversals occurred with electricity, that ended sequence by making things instant. With instant speed, the causes of things began to emerge to awareness again, as they had not done with things in sequence and in concatenation accordingly. Instead of asking which came first, the chicken or the egg, it suddenly seemed that a chicken was an egg's idea for getting more eggs. This is a great paragraph. So another way he's going to contrast the older mechanical regime with the new regime of automation, which of course is built on electricity, is that speed has begun to reveal the sort of cybernetic or circular shape of causality. We couldn't discern causes from mere sequences under the older mechanical regime. The mechanical regime broke everything into parts and laid it side by side, and everything was plus one. And when you do that, as David Hume points out, all you get is induction. You can only induct through sheer probability that this is what will happen when these sort of factors line up. But if things happen instantaneously, McLuhan's pointing out, we begin to notice the self-referential loop of causality, and we can start to get into that loop better. Just before an airplane breaks the sound barrier, sound waves become visible on the wings of the plane. The sudden visibility of sound, just as sound ends, is an apt instance of that great pattern of being that reveals new and opposite forms, just as the earlier forms reach their peak performance. There's an analogy here for media. What I see him saying here is that we actually don't truly understand one medium until it is revealed in another medium that accelerates it or surpasses it. So it's like the sound waves, which are the medium in this case, are revealed right at the point where sound itself is being surpassed. So the medium that is surpassing the current medium, swallowing it up, transforming it, overcoming it, sublating it, maybe we could say. It's at that liminal space where the sort of earlier medium becomes visible in its nature and its function. Mechanization was never so vividly fragmented or sequential as in the birth of the movies, the moment that translated us beyond mechanism into the world of growth and organic interrelation. So he's pointing out that movies, the things that kind of moved us into the world of automation, of this integral intelligence, this lifelikeness, was ironically was this highly sequential thing, which is just flipping a bunch of pictures as fast as possible, which is the definition of a series. The sequential flashing of images, static images. It is the mechanism par excellence, but it's right at the point of acceleration where we've pushed it to its limit, where it breaks through into a new medium entirely. Also, thereby revealing kind of the truth of the prior medium, of the mechanistic world that we're breaking beyond. The movie, by sheer speeding up the mechanical, carried us from the world of sequence and connections into the world of creative configuration and structure. The message of the movie medium is that of transition from lineal connections to configurations. It is the transition that produced the now quite correct observation. If it works, it's obsolete. When electric speed further takes over from mechanical movie sequences, then the lines of force in structures and in media become loud and clear. We return to the inclusive form of the icon. To a highly literate and mechanized culture, the movie appeared as a world of triumphant illusions and dreams that money could buy. It was at this moment of the movie that Cubism occurred, and it has been described by E. H. Gombrich as the most radical attempt to stamp out ambiguity and to enforce one reading of the picture, that of a man-made construction, a colored canvas. For Cubism substitutes all facets of an object simultaneously for the point of view or facet of perspective illusion. Instead of the specialized illusion of the third dimension on canvas, Cubism sets up an interplay of planes and contradiction or dramatic conflict of patterns, lights, texture that drives home the message by involvement. This is held by many to be an exercise in painting, not an illusion. In other words, Cubism, by giving the inside and outside, the top, bottom, back, and front, and the rest in two dimensions, drops the illusion of perspective in favor of instant sensory awareness of the whole. Cubism, by seizing on instant total awareness, suddenly announced that the medium is the message. Is it not evident that the moment the sequence yields to the simultaneous, one is in the world of the structure and of configuration? There's another money quote right there. The moment that sequence yields to the simultaneous, find ourselves in the world of structure and configuration. Is that not what has happened in physics as in painting, poetry, and in communication? Specialized segments of attention have shifted to total field, and we can now say the medium is the message quite naturally. Before the electric speed and total field, it was not obvious that the medium is the message. The message, it seemed, was the content, as people used to ask what a painting was about. Yet they never thought to ask what a melody was about, nor what a house or a dress was about. In such matters, people retained some sense of the whole pattern of form and function as a unity. But in the electrical age, this integral idea of structure and configuration has become so prevalent that educational theory has taken up the matter. Instead of working with specialized problems in arithmetic, the structural approach now follows the linea of force in the field of number and has small children meditating about number theory and sets. Cardinal Newman said of Napoleon, he understood the grammar of gunpowder. Napoleon had paid some attention to other media as well, especially the semaphore telegraph that gave him a great advantage over his enemies. He is on record for saying that 3 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Alexis de Tocqueville was the first to master the grammar of print and typography. He was thus able to read off the message of coming change in France and America as if he were reading aloud from a text that had been handed to him. In fact, the 19th century in France and America was just such an open book to de Tocqueville because he had learned the grammar of print. So he also knew when that grammar did not apply. He was asked why he did not write a book on England, since he knew and admired England. He replied, One would have to have an unusual degree of philosophical folly to believe oneself able to judge England in 6 months. A year always seemed to me too short a time in which to appreciate the United States properly, and it is much easier to acquire clear and precise notions about the American Union than about Great Britain. In America, all laws derive, in a sense, from the same line of thought. The whole of society, so to speak, is founded upon a single fact. Everything springs from a simple principle. One could compare America to a forest, pierced by a multitude of straight roads, all converging on the same point. One has only to find the center, and everything is revealed at a glance. But in England the paths run crisscross, and it is only by traveling down each one of them that one can build up a picture of the whole. De Tocqueville, in earlier work on the French Revolution, had explained how it was the printed word that, achieving cultural saturation in the 18th century, had homogenized the French nation. Frenchmen were the same kind of people from north to south. The typographic principles of uniformity, continuity, and lineality had overlaid the complexities of ancient feudal and oral society. The revolution was carried out by the new literati and lawyers. In England, however, such was the power of the ancient oral traditions of common law, backed by the medieval institution of Parliament, that no uniformity or continuity of the new visual print culture could take complete hold. The result was that the most important event in English history has never taken place, namely, the English Revolution, on the lines of the French Revolution. The American Revolution had no medieval legal institutions to discard or to root out, apart from monarchy, and many have held that the American presidency has become much more personal and monarchical than any European monarch ever could be. De Tocqueville's contrast between England and America is clearly based on the fact of typography and of print culture, creating uniformity and continuity. England, he says, has rejected this principle and clung to the dynamic or oral common law tradition, hence the discontinuity and unpredictable quality of English culture. The grammar of print cannot help to construe the message of oral and non-written culture and institutions. The English aristocracy was properly classified as barbarian by Matthew Arnold because its power and status had nothing to do with literacy or with the cultural forms of typography. Said the Duke of Gloucester to Edward Gibbon upon the publication of his Decline and Fall, "Another damned fat book, eh, Mr. Gibbon? Scribble, eh, Mr. Gibbon?" De Tocqueville was a highly literate aristocrat who was quite able to be detached from the values and assumptions of typography. That is why he alone understood the grammar of typography, and it is only on those terms, standing aside from any structure or medium, that its principle and lines of force can be discerned. For any medium has the power of imposing its own assumption on the unwary. Prediction and control consist in avoiding this subliminal state of narcissist trance. But the greatest aid to this end is simply in knowing that the spell can occur immediately upon contact, as in the first bars of a melody. McLuhan is saying here that the medium's power, simply through your using it, coming in contact with the medium, it puts you into a trance state. Since it becomes a part of you, it changes you, and you aren't aware of the change because it's operating before you understand what's happening. Because again, understanding as this like idea of coming to grasp content is not actually how the medium does its work. A Passage to India by E.M. Forster is a dramatic study of the inability of oral and intuitive Oriental culture to meet with the rational, visual European patterns of experience. Rational, of course, has for the West long meant uniform and continuous and sequential. In other words, we have confused reason with literacy and rationalism with a single technology. Thus, in the Electric Age, man seems to the conventional West to become irrational. In Forster's novel, the moment of truth and dislocation from the typographic trance of the West comes in the Malabar caves. Adela Quisted's reasoning powers cannot cope with the total inclusive field of resonance that is India. After the caves, life went on as usual, but had no consequence. That is to say, sounds did not echo nor thought develop. Everything seemed cut off at its root, and therefore infected with illusion. A Passage to India, the phrase is from Whitman, who saw America headed eastward, is a parable of Western man in the Electric Age, and is only incidentally related to Europe or the Orient. The ultimate conflict between sight and sound, between written and oral kinds of perception and organization of existence is upon us. Since understanding stops action, as Nietzsche observed, we can moderate the fierceness of this conflict by understanding the media that extend us and raise these wars within and without us. Detribalization by literacy and its traumatic effects on tribal man is the theme of a book by the psychiatrist J.C. Carruthers, The African Mind in Health and Disease. Much of his material appeared in an article in Psychiatry magazine, November 1959, The Culture, Psychiatry, and the Written Word. Again, it is electric speed that has revealed the lines of force operating from Western technology in the remotest areas of bush, savanna, and desert. One example is the Bedouin with his battery radio on board the camel. Submerging natives with floods of concepts for which nothing has prepared them is the normal action of all of our technology. But with electric media, Western man himself experiences exactly the same inundation as the remote native. We are no more prepared to encounter radio and TV in our literate milieu than the native of Ghana is able to cope with the literacy that takes him out of his collective tribal world and beaches him in individual isolation. We are as numb in our new electrical world as the native involved in our literate and mechanical culture. Sounds like what McLuhan's saying here is that we can see an earlier stage of our own dysphoria by looking at cultures that are still developing, cultures that they didn't go from oral to print to electric, but they went straight from oral tribal culture to the world of the mechanical, radio, sound, these sort of things. So we can see them as they make that jump and how bewildering it is. We should look at that and see ourselves in a similar situation. We just don't see ourselves that way. We don't get it because we're immersed in it. But we really are that disoriented, and we're changing more rapidly than we realize. But I also think there's just like a little note in here. He talks about our literate milieu, and I think it's really important to see literacy as a technology and as the dominant technology that created our culture, and that the shift away from literary culture in the 20th century seems to me one of the crucial changes in our culture. We see basically the fall of the WASP establishment in America. Their culture, the elite culture of white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism, is fundamentally a literary culture. And it's the fall of that unified WASP literary culture which has caused the fragmentation of American culture. And what we have today is the attempt for something new to spring up in its place. So electric speed mingles the cultures of prehistory with the dregs of industrial marketeers, the non-literate with the semi-literate and the post-literate. Mental breakdown of varying degrees is the common result of uprooting an inundation with new information and endless new patterns of information. Wyndham Lewis made this theme of his group of novels called The Human Age. The first of these, the Childermass, is concerned precisely with accelerated media change as a kind of massacre of the innocents. In our own world, as we become more aware of the effects of technology on psychic formation and manifestation, we are losing all confidence in our right to assign guilt. Ancient prehistoric societies regard violent crime as pathetic. The killer is regarded as we do a cancer victim. How terrible it must be to feel like that, they say. J.M. Synge took up this idea very effectively in his Playboy of the Western World. Sorry, folks. If the criminal appears as a nonconformist who is unable to meet the demand of technology that we behave in uniform and continuous patterns, literate man is quite inclined to see others who cannot conform as somewhat pathetic. Especially if the child, the cripple, the woman, and the colored person appear in the world of visual and typographic technology as victims of injustice. On the other hand, in a culture that assigns roles instead of jobs to people, The dwarf, the skew, the child create their own spaces. They are not expected to fit into some uniform and repeatable niche that is not their size anyway. Consider the phrase, "it's a man's world," as a quantitative observation endlessly repeated from within a homogenized culture. This phrase refers to the men in such a culture who have to be homogenized Dagwoods in order to belong at all. It is in our IQ testing that we have produced the greatest flood of misbegotten standards. Unaware of our typographic cultural bias, our testers assume that uniform and continuous habits are a sign of intelligence, thus eliminating the ear man and the tactile man. A swipe at IQ testing and the culture of assessment and of advancement and uniform and continuous habits. So some really interesting stuff here that's like, you know, you could take these concepts in McLuhan and read them against the contemporary right, I think. C.P. Snow, reviewing a book of A.L. Rowse on appeasement and the road to Munich, describes the top level of British brains and experience in the 1930s. Their IQs were much higher than usual among political bosses. Why were they such a disaster? The view of Rowse, Snow approves, they would not listen to warnings because they did not wish to hear. Being anti-red made it impossible for them to read the message of Hitler. But their failure was as nothing compared to our present one. The American stake in literacy as a technology, or uniformity applied to every level of education, government, industry, and social life, is totally threatened by the electric technology. The threat of Stalin or Hitler was external. The electric technology is within the gates, and we are numb, deaf, blind, and mute about its encounter with the Gutenberg technology, on and through which the American way of life was formed. This line is a reference to McLuhan's earlier book, The Gutenberg Galaxy, and like I was saying earlier, he basically sees the Gutenberg revolution of print as the technology that gave birth to the modern world, and the mechanistic culture, mechanistic technologies, and he's pointing out that it's the electrical technology in its encounter with the Gutenberg technology which is producing the contemporary conflicts of our age. It is, however, no time to suggest strategies when the threat has not even been acknowledged to exist. I am in the position of Louis Pasteur telling doctors that their greatest enemy was quite invisible and quite unrecognized by them. Our conventional response to all media, namely that is how they are used, that counts, is the numb stance of the technological idiot. From the content of a medium is like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. The effect of the medium is made strong and intense just because it is given another medium as content. The content of a movie is a novel, or a play, or an opera. The effect of the movie form is not related to its program content. The content of writing or print is speech, but the reader is almost entirely unaware either of print or of speech. Which makes this very video strange because you are watching a video, listening to me read print of McLuhan's speech. I don't know, it's certainly a strange situation we find ourselves in, but I hope you're still with me, and I'm glad you're here if you are. Arnold Toynbee is innocent of any understanding of media as they have shaped history, but he is full of examples that the student of media can use. At one moment, he can seriously suggest that adult education, such as the Workers' Educational Association in Britain, is a useful counterforce to the popular press. Toynbee considers that although all of the Oriental societies have in our time accepted the industrial technology and its political consequences, on the cultural plane, however, there is no uniform corresponding tendency. This is like the voice of the literate man, floundering in a milieu of ads, who boasts, "Personally, I pay no attention to ads." The spiritual and cultural reservations that the Oriental peoples may have toward our technology will avail them not at all. The effects of technology do not occur at the level of opinions or concepts, but alter sense ratios or patterns of perception steadily and without any resistance. The serious artist is the only person able to encounter technology with impunity, just because he is an expert aware of the changes in sense perception. So McLuhan's clarifying here what he means. Again, he's reiterating that it is not concepts, ideas, opinions, or content at which that's not the level at which the effects of the technology is working, but it's the alteration of perception and sense experience. It's only through being clued into our own sense experiences, through our own rhythms and energies, and the different speeds and ratios of our perception that we can then understand, we can see the difference between, we could feel the difference between reading a book versus listening to an audiobook versus watching a movie about that book. These It is the change in perception caused by the medium itself, which is the message of the medium. The operation of the money medium in 17th century Japan had effects not unlike the operation of typography in the West. The penetration of the money economy, wrote G.B. Sansom, caused a slow but irresistible revolution, culminating in the breakdown of feudal government and the resumption of intercourse with foreign countries after more than 200 years of seclusion. Money has reorganized the sense life of peoples just because it is an extension of our sense lives. This change does not depend upon approval or disapproval of those living in the society. So I think this is important too, that McLuhan even describes money as a form of media. It is a medium. And that media reorganizes the sense of life because it is an extension of us and changes our sense of life. And this operates without our consent and without our knowledge. Arnold Toynbee made one approach to the transforming power of media in his concept of etherealization, which he holds to be the principle of progressive simplification and efficiency in any organization or technology. Typically, he is ignoring the effect of the challenge of these forms upon the response of our senses. He imagines that it is the response of our opinions that is relevant to the effect of media technology in society, a point of view that is plainly the result of the typographic spell. For the man in a literate and homogenized society ceases to be sensitive to the diverse and discontinuous life of forms. He acquires the illusion of the third dimension and the private point of view as part of his Narcissus fixation, and is quite shut off from Blake's awareness, or that of the psalmist, that we become what we behold. That last line, we become what we behold, is from, like he mentions it, the psalmist of the Old Testament. Also, we see this critique in the prophet Isaiah. I wrote a piece about this a couple of years ago, basically arguing that the critique of ideology and the critique of the ego, which is what is being constructed in ideology, finds its origin, I think, in the Jewish critique of pagan idols. I'll link that in the show notes description, but that is worth looking into. And McLuhan here is saying that immersion in a culture of literacy flattens out and homogenizes and standardizes our experience to such a level that we become desensitized to all of the diverse and discontinuous forms of life and types of perception. That's fascinating for me as somebody who feels deeply indebted to and shaped and formed by literary culture. Growing up in a house full of books, always reading, spent less time watching television or playing video games than my peers. Not to say I played none at all, but books were my primary fascination, and I lived in a culture where reading and learning and ideas and debate were valorized. They were incentivized and rewarded and looked upon by authority figures as a good thing, rewarded by the community. And so I do feel at times a part of this older world. And so I can see what McLuhan is saying. And I do think that the range of my experience and the sensitivity to my own body and the subtleties of perception and the energies in me, I do feel so ham-handed and even ignorant and numb of how to work with those things. Today, when we want to get our bearings in our own culture and have need to stand aside from the bias and pressure exerted by any technical form of human experience, we have only to visit a society where that particular form has not been felt, or a historical period in which it was unknown. Professor Wilbur Schramm made such a tactical move in studying television and the lives of our children. He found areas where TV had not penetrated at all and ran some tests. Since he had made no study of the peculiar nature of the TV image, His tests were of content preferences, viewing time, and vocabulary counts. In a word, his approach to the problem was a literary one, albeit unconsciously. Consequently, he had nothing to report. Had his methods been employed in 1500 AD to discover the effects of the printed book in the lives of children or adults, he could have found out nothing of the changes in human and social psychology resulting from typography. Print created individualism and nationalism in the 16th century. Program and content analysis offer no clues to the magic of these media or to their subliminal charge. His note, print created individualism and nationalism in the 16th century, harkens back to his, on the first page where he says that mechanical technology both fragments and centralizes. So print both fragmented us individuals, but also centralized power into the nation state. It's interesting how he harkens back to that without, maybe he's not even doing it consciously, but I see it there. These two, both the individual and even a higher level of unity, were both generated at the same time, almost as like opposites of each other. Leonard Dube, in his report Communication in Africa, tells of one African who took great pains to listen each evening to the BBC News, even though he could understand nothing of it. Just to be in the presence of those sounds at 7 p.m. each day was important for him. His attitude was like ours to melody. The resonant intonation was meaning enough. In the 17th century, our ancestors still shared the natives' attitude to the forms of media, as is plain in the following sentiment of the Frenchman Bernard Lamb, expressed in The Art of Speaking. "'Tis an effect of the wisdom of God, who created man to be happy, that whatever is useful to his conversation, way of life, is agreeable to him, because all victual that induces to nourishment is relishable, whereas other things that cannot be assimilated and be turned into our substance are insipid. A discourse cannot be pleasant to the hearer that is not easy to the speaker, nor can it be easily pronounced unless it be heard with delight." Here is an equilibrium theory of human diet and expression such as even now we are only striving to work out again for media after centuries of fragmentation and specialism. Pope Pius XII was deeply concerned that there would be serious study of the media today. On February 17, 1950, he said, "It is not an exaggeration to say that the future of modern society and the stability of its inner life depend in large part on the maintenance of an equilibrium between the strengths of the techniques of communication and the capacity of the individual's own reaction. Failure in this respect has for centuries been typical and total for mankind. Subliminal and docile acceptance of media impact has made them prisons without walls for their human users. As A.J. Liebling remarked in his book The Press, a man is not free if he cannot see where he is going, even if he has a gun to help him get there. For each of the media is also a powerful weapon with which to clobber other media and other groups. The result is that the present age has been one of multiple civil wars that are not limited to the world of art and entertainment. In War and Human Progress, Professor J.U. Neff declared, "The total wars of our time have been the result of a series of intellectual mistakes." If the formative power in the media are the media themselves, they raise a host of large matters that can only be mentioned here, although they deserve volumes. Namely, that technological media are staples or natural resources, exactly as are coal and cotton and oil. Anybody will concede that society whose economy is dependent upon one or two major staples, like cotton or grain or lumber or fish or cattle, is going to have some obvious social patterns of organization as a result. Stress on a few major staples creates extreme instability in the economy, but great endurance in the population. The pathos and humor of the American South are embedded in such an economy of limited staples. For a society configured by reliance on a few commodities accepts them as a social bond quite as much as the metropolis does the press. Cotton and oil, like radio and TV, become fixed charges on the entire psychic life of the community, and this pervasive fact creates the unique cultural flavor of any society. It pays through the nose and all its other senses for each staple that shapes its life. That our human senses, of which all media are extensions, are also fixed charges on our personal energies, and that they also configure the awareness and experience of each of us, may be perceived in another connection mentioned by the psychologist C.G. Jung. Every Roman was surrounded by slaves. The slave and his psychology flooded ancient Italy, and every Roman became inwardly, and of course unwittingly, a slave. Because living constantly in the atmosphere of slaves, he became infected through the unconscious with their psychology. No one can shield himself from such an influence. Fascinating. The idea that like the slave is a technology to extend the master into his environment, to extend his capacity to do and to think. A household run by slaves is like a small computer, each of the slaves being a node in the larger network that is controlled by the master. And yet, Jung and McLuhan are saying that this reliance upon the slave, the making the slave an extension of yourself and your technology, transforms you and makes you to have the unconscious psychology of the slave. Makes me think of Hegel's master-slave dialectic and how the master gets the short end of the stick in that arrangement, that it's the slave only through positioning himself against the master and using him as a way of self-development that the slave is able to move beyond being a slave. But the master, dependent on the slave, cannot progress to any higher levels of development. But last, I just want to point out before we go that our human senses, this line right here, he's saying that media are just extensions of human senses, and therefore they're fixed charges on our personal energies, and that they configure the awareness and experience of each one of us. These three lines, I think, encapsulate so much of McLuhan's perspective here. And if we need to start seeing technology in this way, if we have any hope of seriously confronting the conflicts and challenges of our age, and thinking seriously about how we are being transformed by the things that we use and encounter on a daily basis. Thank you for your time. This has been The Medium is the Message by Marshall McLuhan in his book Understanding Media. This is a part of my ongoing critical bureaucratic studies research project, which I'm going to be turning into a course, an online a live seminar course that you're going to be able to participate in sometime summer or the latter half of this year. Again, I will update this video with more information once I've got the sign up for that ready. But for now, thank you for listening. I hope that you'll like and subscribe, and I hope that this was valuable for you. Thanks. Have a great day.